Grossi Packer Nation. Welcome to another episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. I've already seen all the tweets of Khalil Mack going to be covering Davante Adams, and it just brings me so much joy. Grossi, and today, going to talk about some breaking news. We had another video planned, but this was just too delicious to pass up. The Chicago Bears have hired former Packers defensive coordinator Mike Pettine as their senior defensive assistant for their new DC Sean Desai. And yeah, that's pretty great. Before we jump to that, I want to do a big shout and thank you to a brand new YouTube member. We have Adam Chung joining the Grossi Posse over on YouTube, and a big shout out and thank you to you, Adam. Now, we didn't do a video when Desai was actually hired as the Bears offensive coordinator, replacing Chuck Pagano, so we'll give a little bit of background here, and then I'll give my thoughts about the hiring of Mike Pettine. So Desai, he replaced Pagano because Pagano retired after this past season. He has more than 10 years of experience as an NFL coach and has been with the Bears since 2013. He's been the safeties coach for the past 2 years, which obviously the safeties have been kind of like a point of pride with the Chicago Bears. Thankfully, you allowed us to take Amos, and he's just been wonderful for us, so thank you. No, really, thank you. But obviously the safeties are still good, led by Eddie Jackson, and they're nothing to scoff at. And I think Desai is a great candidate for the Bears. It's obviously an internal hire, and it's kind of like, hey, you have all of this experience. You obviously know how the defense works since you've been with us for so long. Here's your shot. Now, obviously, he hasn't been a defensive coordinator before, and so you bring in a guy with experience like Mike Pettine. Now, I imagine this hire is for multiple reasons. One, as I just said, you bring in a veteran for a new guy who has never had that coordination experience before. He could be like that sounding board and be like, hey, here's what I would do in this situation. And second, of course, the fact that he's been on the Green Bay Packers for the past couple of years, I'm sure has a little bit to do with it, because Matt LaFleur has kicked the Bears' ass these past 2 years, and maybe they just want a little bit of insight on how is that happening. Now, I know Mike Pettine wasn't beloved in Green Bay in any way, shape, or form, and people were calling for his firing not only last season, but of course at the end of this season when the Packers decided not to re-sign him. But, I mean, he did get the Packers 9th overall in total defense, so that is something. Now, the question becomes is you look at their defensive performance in the playoffs, especially against the Buccaneers in the first half, and you're like, ugh, not so much. However, you also look at the other half of that game in which they got 3 interceptions. So, you know, there's give and take there. And for Bears fans kind of wondering, okay, what do we have in Mike Pettine that we haven't seen over the past 2 years? I think basically what you're going to get is not a bad defensive coordinator, but I think what you're getting is a guy whose potential was definitely limited. He is now going to be taking a role that is lesser than a defensive coordinator, and I think he actually might do pretty well in this role. I also think it's a bonus for you guys that he has an understanding of this Green Bay Packers team, considering he would play them twice every single year. So this actually, while I am laughing because it is Mike Pettine, I don't think this is the worst signing in the entire world. Now, it's also accurate that former Packers defensive coordinators usually find their way amongst the NFC North teams, which is just, it's funny. But I think this hooks Desai up with a bunch of experience that he can rely upon, and as well as make the defense his own. Will that lead to an improved Bears defense? Sure. Or at least remaining the same because it's a good defense? Sure. That offense, though, that's a different story. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Is Mike Pettine now dead to you forever? Yes. But let me know what you think. You can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy on all social media. See down below. Check out Packcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And a big shout and thank you to all the patrons over at Patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy and the YouTube members. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.